59-year-old Michael Barison is a world-renowned former equestrian coach who mastered the extremely difficult sport of dressage. In 2018, an aspiring dressage rider named Lauren Kanarek moved to a rental house on his training farm in Morris County, New Jersey, with her 2 new horses and her fiancé, Robert Goodwin, to dedicate herself full-time to the sport. But Kanarek quickly became disappointed by the training. She expected more one-on-one time with Barison, who was unable to give her his undivided attention because he had other students to train. Kanarek was also upset because she only wanted to work with Barison, even though the coaches he employed were highly skilled and qualified to teach under his standards. She voiced her frustrations on social media, and the tone of her complaints escalated noticeably in 2019 when she accused Barison of being racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic. In one post, Kanarek wrote that it was possibly time to go to war, making it clear that she had no plans to stop or slow down her efforts to destroy her coach. Barison's friends and colleagues knew Kanarek's allegations were untrue, but he began to fear that the slanderous claims would negatively impact his professional reputation and jeopardize his business, which he had worked extremely hard to build. He began to mentally unravel due to the stress of the situation and asked Kanarek and Goodwin to leave his property. The couple refused, and police were called to the farm at least 4 times that summer as the feud intensified. Barison said he feared for his life, but officers classified the matter as a landlord-tenant issue and told him to resolve it in civil court. The hostilities reached a boiling point one August afternoon when Barison walked to Kanarek's rental house and shot her twice in the chest at close range. He also tried to shoot Goodwin, who tackled him at the scene and was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Meanwhile, Kanarek was rushed to the hospital where she spent weeks fighting for her life and narrowly survived her injuries. In 2022, a jury found Barison not guilty by reason of insanity after concluding that he had snapped and temporarily lost touch with reality under the stress of Kanarek's smear campaign. He was ordered to undergo inpatient psychiatric treatment and was released in November of 2023 after doctors determined that he was no longer a danger to himself or others. Barison is reportedly working on a book and is in the process of suing his farm's insurance company for failing to defend him against Kanarek's attempts to ruin his life. Number 19. Richard Rojas. 18-year-old Elisa Elsman was killed and 22 others were injured while walking in Times Square in May of 2017 when a raging madman named Richard Rojas plowed his car into the crowd. The 26-year-old Navy veteran drove on the sidewalk for several blocks until police caught up with him and tackled him to the ground. He was charged with 1 count of murder, 22 counts of attempted murder, and 5 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide. Rojas had no alcohol in his system at the time of the crash. His defense attorneys pushed for an insanity verdict, claiming that he was psychotic and unaware of his actions when he committed the crime. They highlighted his history of mental illness, hoping to demonstrate that Rojas did not understand the consequences of his actions. The prosecution argued that Rojas had acted knowingly and with intent, specifically targeting a place where he knew there would be a lot of people for the sake of causing maximum carnage. During his arrest, he reportedly said, "I wanted to kill them all," to a nearby traffic cop, further suggesting that he understood what he had just done. Rojas became noticeably symptomatic after being kicked out of the Navy when he became extremely paranoid. He believed someone was poisoning his food, that he was being followed by strangers, and that commercial airplanes were dusting the earth with toxic chemicals. His mental state only worsened with time as he went without proper help. Jurors heard harrowing witness testimony from surviving victims and witnesses, including actor Thomas Patterson, who was walking to work when he saw someone being thrown 25 feet into the air. He initially chased after the perpetrator's car, but stopped and called 911. Tax lawyer Michael Elias described the scene as pandemonium, and he recalled seeing bodies flying and hearing people screaming. The jury found Rojas not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, concluding that Rojas was not at fault for all the pain and suffering he caused. he was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility where he'll remain indefinitely as he receives much-needed treatment. Number 18. Brandon Adalot. 48-year-old schoolteacher Sharon Adalot was murdered on Christmas Eve in 2012 by her teenage son, Brandon Adalot, who stabbed his mother repeatedly, bludgeoned her with a baseball bat and stomped on her face. When questioned by police about his motive for the horrific slaying, Brandon said that he was angry at his family for suspecting him of drug use and putting him in a substance abuse program. He matter-of-factly said that he felt like he had done the right thing and was charged with murder. Brandon's defense attorneys argued for an insanity verdict, claiming that their clients had heard voices instructing him to kill Sharon. A psychiatrist testified that Brandon, who suffers from schizophrenia, believed he was gifted with magical powers and genuinely believed he was doing the right thing by murdering his mother. Due to the delusional nature of his symptoms, the judge overseeing the case found Brandon not guilty by reason of insanity following a bench trial in 2016. Nearly 3 years after Sharon's death, he was involuntarily committed to a state mental hospital where he would undergo periodic evaluations to determine if he was fit to re-enter society. Assistant State Attorney Greg Marcil vowed to oppose Brandon's release anytime the case came up for review, but reassured reporters that the defendant would not walk free any time in the near future. In March of 2024, experts concluded that Adalot no longer met the criteria for remaining institutionalized. A treatment team recommended his release despite their belief that Brandon could become dangerous again if he stops taking his medication. Sharon's loved ones urged the court to keep Brandon in a secure mental facility, saying that they believe he's a danger to society. The judge ruled to release him to the Apalachee Center, a secure step-down facility in Tallahassee, where he'll continue to receive mental health treatment while on 24/7 lockdown. If he continues to show signs of improvement, he'll slowly gain increased privileges and freedoms, which could eventually lead to him rejoining civilian life with no supervision. Number 17. Eric Christopher Perez. 53-year-old Clinton Maxwell Phillips was brutally hacked to death by a hatchet-wielding assailant in March of 2021 while living in a transitional house in Mobile, Alabama, for people who were getting back on their feet after falling on hard times. The killer, 39-year-old Eric Christopher Perez, had previously visited the residence, and after meeting the street preacher who owned it at a Christian music festival, he broke into the house during the early morning hours and went from one bedroom to the next as he attacked residents and destroyed property. Perez was apprehended less than a half-mile from the crime scene several hours later. He initially pleaded not guilty to murder, but changed his plea to not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect more than a year and a half after the gruesome slaying. Dr. Cameron Snyder, who performed Phillips's post-mortem medical exam, ranked it as one of a dozen or so autopsies that stand out among the hundreds he's performed due to the extreme violence that the victim was subjected to. The court also heard from 2 forensic psychiatrists, one for the prosecution and one for the defense, who testified that Perez suffers from bipolar disorder with severe manic episodes and psychotic features. Both experts said that they did not believe Perez understood the wrongfulness of his actions when he killed Phillips. The defense revealed that Perez had an extensive history of mental health issues, which began more than a decade earlier when he was assaulted in Korea while serving with the US Army and suffered a traumatic brain injury. He supposedly believed he was a prophet, rambled incoherently about God, and experienced religious delusions. Shortly before the murder, Perez had stood on his mailbox and doused himself in vinegar as part of a bizarre cleansing ritual. His odd behavior continued after his arrest at the Mobile County Jail, where he was seen lying naked on the ground with his feet in the air. In the absence of any testimony that Perez understood the wrongfulness of his actions, the judge found him not guilty by reason of insanity. The ruling will most likely spare him from prison time and sentence him indefinitely to treatment at a state hospital, where he'll periodically undergo evaluations to determine if he's well enough to be released. Number 16. Jareth Vance. Ontario, Ohio police officer Dylan Bailey was lucky to be alive after being injured in a shootout with an accused kidnapper in February of 2024. The 29-year-old and several other officers had responded to a complaint about a restraining order violation at a local apartment where 32-year-old Jareth Vance was holding a young woman hostage. At gunpoint, Vance opened fire on the cops when they tried rescuing the woman, who had also been shot by her captor for trying to escape. The victim had an order of protection banning Vance from contacting her due to past stalking and harassment. Bailey was taken to the hospital in stable condition, while members of multiple law enforcement agencies rushed to the scene, where hostage negotiators spent hours trying to convince Vance to surrender. The standoff finally ended 4 hours after the incident began, when the suspect exited the residence and was taken into custody without further incident. Police rescued the female captive, who was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Vance was initially booked into custody on an attempted aggravated murder charge. He was subsequently indicted on 37 felonies and 5 misdemeanors, including 4 counts of attempted aggravated murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of kidnapping, 6 counts of menacing by stalking, aggravated arson, aggravated menacing, inducing panic, disrupting public services, possessing criminal tools, theft, and 2 attempted animal cruelty charges. If convicted as charged, Vance could face up to 200 years in prison. In addition to the charges stemming from the armed standoff, he had been arrested the previous month in a domestic violence case, although it's unclear whether the prior situation involved the same victim. He remains in custody at the Richland County Jail with bail set at $1 million. Number 15. Damian Mckel. In July of 2012, 18-year-old Damian Mckel approached his mother from behind and stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife in their Cobb County, Georgia home as she desperately tried to run away. He then dialed 911 and waited at the residence for police to arrive. Responding officers found the body of 58-year-old Damian Mckel inside the home, where Damian had made efforts to clean up the crime scene. The team was detained without bail on suspicion of murder and aggravated assault. Law enforcement had responded to domestic disputes at the family's home in the past, and Damian had been arrested multiple times over a 2-year period leading up to his mother's death. 7 months before Diane's death, he had threatened to kill a police officer after he was caught stealing iPads from a Target store. He was sentenced to probation in that case and had recently been charged with violating when Diane was murdered. Damian's mental health had deteriorated in recent years as he became plagued by paranoid delusions. He believed his mother was routinely poisoning his food and drink, and that he was an FBI agent who had killed multiple people while traveling back and forth between Russia and the US for work missions. Just weeks before Diane's murder, he had been hospitalized and diagnosed with schizophrenia. In 2014, a judge found Damian guilty during a bench trial and sentenced him to life without parole. The court granted him a retrial 3 years later after concluding that he had not knowingly waived his right to a jury trial. And in 2017, a jury found the teen not guilty of malice murder by reason of insanity and guilty but mentally ill of felony murder and aggravated assault. This effectively meant that Damian had been found guilty but not guilty of murder, and that the jury had found him both sane and insane. Prosecutors sought to retry him while his attorneys argued that it would be wrong to do so due to the state's double jeopardy clause, which prohibits someone from being tried twice for the same crime after a verdict has already been determined. The bizarre case went all the way to the US Supreme Court, which ruled that state authorities could not retry Damian because it would in fact constitute double jeopardy. While it's extremely rare for a jury to rule in such a conflicting fashion, the decision has set a precedent for any similarly contradictory events that may arise in the future. Number 14. COR of Viz. On what began as a normal evening in February of 2021, high school senior Georgia Avery visited the Santa Barbara, California home of her close friend and classmate, COR of Viz, who's the daughter of Microsoft executive Joshua Viz. The young women ate dinner, played video games and watched a movie in celebration of Videz's 18th birthday. Avery gifted Videz a drawing, and Videz showed Avery a 7-inch switchblade she had received from her parents. As the night wore on, the teens discussed typical topics like their upcoming graduation and college plans, and Videz mentioned that she had been feeling depressed. Avery offered her support and the conversation continued into the early morning hours. She eventually tried leaving because it had gotten late, but Videz insisted on trying a new medication technique on Avery before she went home. Avery agreed and laid on her back as instructed by her friend. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply and was feeling relaxed when Videz counted down from 3 and stabbed her in the throat with the switchblade. Barely able to breathe and unable to scream for help, Avery fought to wrestle the blade away as Videz tried stabbing her a second time. She struggled to keep her grasp on the blood-covered weapon and was in excruciating pain as she purposely tangled the blade in her hair in order to get a better grip on it, sustaining multiple head lacerations in the process. Videz proceeded to place Avery in a chokehold and refused to let go as the victim begged and pleaded for her life. Fighting through her fear and pain, Avery persuaded Videz to let go of her neck, promising to forgive her and that they would still be friends. At around the same time, Videz's parents overheard the commotion and found Avery in the hallway. They drove her to the hospital where she fell unconscious and later woke up in the intensive care unit. Avery underwent multiple emergency surgeries as she fought for her life. Both of her lungs collapsed, giving doctors no choice but to intubate her through the stab wound in her neck. She remained hospitalized for weeks and went days without sleep, worried that Videz would show up and kill her. Her arms were often strapped to her hospital bed, so she couldn't rip the tubes out of her body, and she suffered lasting emotional trauma. In hindsight, Avery noticed a red flag that she had overlooked prior to the stabbing. Videz had nagged her to come over after she initially declined the invitation due to COVID-related concerns. And while her persistence was unusual, it had not seemed like a cause for concern. In August of 2024, a jury found Videz guilty of attempted murder. Jurors also ruled that she had acted in a premeditated and deliberate fashion, that she inflicted great bodily injury, and that she used a deadly weapon. During the trial, the defense had argued that Videz was not guilty by reason of insanity. Her parents testified that they knew their daughter was depressed, but that they had admittedly missed the signs that she was suffering from deeper mental issues. Now that she's been found guilty, her trial will move on to what's known as the insanity phase, which will determine whether her guilty conviction should be replaced with a not guilty ruling, due to her mental state at the time of the crime. Number 13. Jason Bond. In June of 2012, a 33-year-old Ivy League-educated lawyer named Jason Bond was accused of fatally strangling his wife, 27-year-old Danielle Thomas, at their apartment in Queens, New York. He then fled the residence in the city's Astoria neighborhood with Thomas's cell phone, which he used to keep her family under the impression that she was okay. Neighbors dialed 911 after overhearing Thomas screaming for help. Police arrived to find Thomas's dead body in a bathtub full of ice. Bond had left 2 handwritten notes at the scene, including one stating that he had accidentally killed Thomas while drunk. This wasn't Bond's first time killing. Nearly 20 years earlier, he had forced his pregnant girlfriend to miscarry. At the time, he was a teen, living in foster care, and was receiving treatment for mental issues. Authorities declined to prosecute him for the killing after experts concluded that he had snapped and had no memory of the crime. Following Thomas's murder, it was revealed that Bond had a history of abusing the young woman. At one point, he had beaten Thomas and threatened to hunt her down like a dog in the streets and make her life impossible, prompting her to seek refuge at a women's shelter, where she stayed for several weeks before going back to Bond. Police eventually captured Bond, and he was charged with Thomas's murder. He claimed to have no recollection of killing the victim, arguing that he suffered from a condition called intermittent explosive disorder, which caused him to black out. While the accused killer waited trial from Bellevue Hospital's jail ward, his brother made a scathing social media post on his behalf. In it, he blamed Thomas for her murder, describing her as a cheater and a compulsive liar while failing to take any responsibility for his actions. Bon also blamed Thomas for causing him to feel insecure and act abusive. He claimed that he knew he should have walked away from the relationship for his own good, but that he was too in love with Thomas to leave her. In court, Bon blamed his ailing mental health on being abandoned as a child, but the jury took no pity on him. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole, ensuring that he'll never step foot in the free world again. Number 12. Fidel Shanga. 45-year-old bar manager Brandon Hardway was smoking outside his workplace in Champaign, Illinois, one day in February of 2024 when 25-year-old Fidel Shanga approached and asked him for a cigarette. Hardway declined the request and Shanga shot him in the back at point-blank range. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died from his injuries about a week later, and Shanga was apprehended near the crime scene on suspicion of first-degree murder, burglary, armed robbery, and aggravated discharge of a firearm. Shanga admitted to shooting Hardway, who he believed was providing people with his location and whereabouts, even though there's no evidence to suggest that this was the case. He felt disrespected and wanted to send a message, further stating that he had no choice other than to shoot Hardway because he was in survival mode, and that it was a matter of kill or be killed. In the 2 years leading up to the deadly shooting, Shamanga's mental health had deteriorated rapidly, landing him in the psychiatric ward on multiple occasions for homicidal thoughts and violent behavior. He also expressed wanting to hurt people and feeling disrespected during outpatient therapy. Shanga did not want to take medication, and he began hallucinating as his paranoia worsened. He believed that people were out to get him and got upset with his mother for refusing to buy him a gun which he believed he needed for his own protection. At some point he began taking medication and showed signs of improvement, but he stopped taking his meds less than a month later and became symptomatic again. In November of 2023, a local resident reported his gun stolen after discovering that the 9mm pistol he kept in his car had gone missing. A few months later, and just days before Hardway's murder, Shanga repeatedly tried talking to a woman on a public bus while she moved to different seats in an effort to get away from him. Angry that she was uninterested in conversing with him, he flashed his gun at her young son, then ripped her phone out of her hand and smashed it against the floor. Shamanga's defense attorneys argued that he was not guilty of Hardway's murder by reason of insanity. Psychiatrists testified that the defendant had acted in accordance with an all-consuming delusion that he was being persecuted, even if the steps he took, like disposing of the murder weapon and hiding from police, seemed logical. Even after taking medication, Shanga had remained irrationally paranoid, leading to the conclusion that he did not understand the wrongfulness of his actions when he killed Hardway. In July of 2024, the judge ruled in favor of the insanity plea following a bench trial that lasted less than an hour. He ordered Shanga to undergo treatment at a secure psychiatric facility, where he could end up spending the rest of his life if his mental health doesn't improve significantly. Number 11. Michael Lucky. 32-year-old Michael Lucky had just been released on bond after being charged with stalking his ex when he allegedly broke into his estranged father-in-law's Boulder, Colorado home in the middle of the night and attacked him with an axe. 60-year-old Stephen Craig's wife awoke to a loud noise but couldn't hear very well because she wasn't wearing her hearing aid and initially assumed it was thunder. When she eventually got up and turned a light on, she noticed that someone had smashed their way into the home through the couple's exterior bedroom door, and that Craig was bleeding and unconscious with blunt and sharp force trauma injuries to the head, neck, and face. He was airlifted to the hospital, where he died several days later. In the months leading up to the murder, Lucky had become entangled in a bitter child custody dispute with Craig's daughter and her family. His estranged wife had obtained an order of protection against him after a series of domestic disputes at the former couple's residence, including one incident where Lucky was accused of destroying the home's interior. Lucky also threatened his wife, who provided the court with 36 pages of text messages when she applied for a protective order. In the conversations, he went back and forth between begging the woman to reconcile and blaming her and her family for their problems. He was accused of violating the order of protection on at least one occasion and had gotten into a blowout with his wife and in-laws over video chat during an argument about the custody case just hours before the axe attack. In addition to his previous charges for stalking and harassing his ex, Lucky is facing felony charges for first-degree murder, stalking in violation of a protective order, burglary and criminal attempt to commit a felony, along with several misdemeanor counts. In August of 2024, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He remains held without bail at the Boulder County Jail while waiting to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Number 10. Fernandez Mason. Just hours after obtaining a gun permit and a pistol in July of 2023, 22-year-old Fernandez Mason shot his mother and sister dead in cold blood at their apartment in Omaha, Nebraska. 55-year-old Lisa Cannon was suffering from terminal cancer when Mason killed her, and her daughter, 30-year-old Marquisha Cannon, who had moved into the apartment to take care of her ailing mother. Douglas County deputies found the women's bodies while performing a welfare check at the request of a concerned family member. The home was in complete disarray, with furniture overturned and cut open, and there was a mattress on top of Marquisha's remains. While investigating the scene, police noticed Mason lurking in the building's parking lot and noticed a partially loaded gun in his car when they went outside to talk to him. He admitted that he had bought the gun shortly before killing the victims and confessed to throwing his bloody clothing in various dumpsters after committing the crime. Authorities charged Mason with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a firearm to commit a felony. When questioned about his motive, the young man said that he had received signs from unknown people telling him to kill his mother. His relatives blamed the Omaha metro area's lack of mental health care for the tragedy, which they believed could have been avoided if Mason had received the care he needed. They also questioned how he obtained a gun permit, given his history of mental health issues. One of Mason's surviving sisters told local station KMTV that she didn't understand why her brother didn't just walk away from the situation when he became angry at the victims. She also expressed dismay over her brother's decision to resort to violence when he could have leaned on her for emotional support. Mason's former foster mother, Monica Bell, told KETV that his mental illness worsened with age, but that he didn't think he needed medication. In July of 2024, a judge found him not responsible by reason of insanity. He was ordered to undergo 90 days of treatment at a psychiatric hospital, and the judge issued an order allowing the facility to medicate him. The hospital was also granted permission to continue overseeing Mason's care following his release once the 90 days are over. Number 9. David Nestrick. In late October of 2022, off-duty police officer Robert Tukowski was stabbed at a hotel in Parsippany Troy Hills, New Jersey, while working private security during a Halloween-themed event. The incident occurred shortly after noon, when the accused stabber, 47-year-old David Nestrick, accused a minor of snapping unauthorized photos and snatched their cell phone out of their hand. An altercation broke out between Nestrick and the child's father, prompting Tukowski to intervene. Nestrick plunged a 4-inch folding knife into the cop's abdomen, causing critical injuries. Tukowski luckily survived, and Nestrick was charged with aggravated assault and 2 weapon-related counts. His defense attorneys argued that he was suffering from a mental illness, which prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions. Nestrick had a history of mental health issues and suffered from bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Just 5 months before the stabbing, he had displayed similar behavior, including grandiosity, racing thoughts, and paranoia during a knife-related incident with family members. During his trial, an expert testified that his THC use had aggravated his symptoms. Even after he got sober during pre-trial detention, he continued to behave strangely, expressing bizarre beliefs relating to human trafficking and conspiracy theories. According to his defense, Nestrick did not suddenly snap. His mental health gradually deteriorated to the point where he eventually lost touch with reality. He reportedly believed that the Halloween event where the stabbing occurred had attracted a large audience of human traffickers who were scouting for victims. Nestrick claimed that onlookers were approaching him when he decided to stab the officer, believing that everyone was involved in a conspiracy to harm him. In July of 2024, a Morris County judge found Nestrick not guilty by reason of insanity. Tarkowski urged the judge to sentence him to some form of confinement, calling Nestrick a menace to society and saying that he deserved to rot in a cell, but he was released back into the community with orders to undergo outpatient psychiatric treatment. He's also required to take drug tests and refrain from using drugs or alcohol, including THC, and is banned from owning weapons. Number 8. Stephen Coffeen. In December of 2009, 42-year-old Stephen Coffeen smothered his 83-year-old father, Robert Coffeen, to death with a couch cushion in Tierra Verde, Florida. The slaying took place at the home of Stephen's brother, Thomas Coffeen, who discovered the World War II veteran's body. Stephen, who worked as an IT consultant, was visiting his father from California for the first time in 11 years. At the time of the murder, he and Thomas had recently made plans to get assistance for their aging father, who was mentally sharp but needed help with some of his day-to-day activities. Stephen blamed his violent behavior on drinking too much Red Bull, claiming that it had prevented him from sleeping and caused him to temporarily go insane. He was charged with murder but maintained his insanity claim throughout the case, insisting he wasn't guilty because he had no self-control or understanding between right and wrong when he killed Robert. Thomas told the court that his brother had no history of mental illness and was acting perfectly normal in the days leading up to their father's death. He accused Stephen of killing their dad out of jealousy over the close relationship between Thomas and the victim. While testifying on the stand, Thomas also claimed that Stephen was jealous of him for being successful and having a family, speculating that his brother murdered their father specifically to hurt him. Psychiatrists for both the defense and the prosecution concluded that Stephen was legally insane when he committed the crime, despite his brother's insistence that he acted knowingly and with intent. He underwent 4 years of treatment at a psychiatric facility and was released in 2013 with permission to return to California while receiving ongoing outpatient care. Number 7. Valdo Kaan. In June of 2023, 32-year-old Valdo Kaan murdered 3 innocent strangers and tried to murder 3 others in what became known as the Nottingham knife attacks. Propelled by paranoid delusions, he viciously stabbed Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley, Kuma, and Ian Coates to death in cold blood during his rampage across the British city. Kaan's mental health landed at the front and center of the case as he underwent multiple psychiatric evaluations to determine whether he was insane at the time of his crime spree. Several experts diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and concluded that he was incapable of exercising self-control when he committed the stabbings, and while 2 psychiatrists testified that Kaan knew what he was doing and was not insane, they conceded that he was mentally ill, and their findings helped solidify the court's decision to spare him from prison time. The triple murderer was ordered to the custody of a mental hospital where he could remain for the rest of his life if he doesn't get better. Kaan has a lengthy history of mental illness and was off his medication when he carried out the knife attacks, leading to widespread scrutiny over the systemic shortcomings that led to a lack of oversight of his care. In addition to skipping his meds often enough for expired tablets to be found in his apartment, he frequently missed mental health appointments. According to the findings of a National Health Service investigation, Kaan's chronic failure to comply with treatment could have possibly been addressed with forced medication injections and a court order allowing closer supervision of his medical care. Kaan's family said They tried to alert the authorities to his ailing mental state, but they weren't taken seriously by professionals, and they had very limited access to information about his treatment due to privacy laws. They believed that if they had been privy to the details of his mental health record, they would have been better able to warn his caseworkers and doctors when he became dangerous. In light of these failures to intervene in time to prevent a mass tragedy, the NHS has vowed to improve its standards for monitoring mentally ill civilians in hopes of preventing history from repeating itself in the future. Number 6. Cody Madson. In late August of 2013, a teenager named Cody Madson fatally beat and drowned his foster brother, Dominic Elkins, while living with a family in rural Harrison County, Iowa. He told police that he believed he was defeating a goblin army leader with a sword and a brick when he killed Elkins. Madson had been living at that particular foster home for about 3 years, while Elkins had joined the household just 3 weeks earlier. They initially got along well, despite having a large age difference between them, and often played video games and did other activities together. But Madson lived in a fantasy world, and he was so immersed in it that he apparently lost the ability to distinguish between reality and imagination. He pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder based on insanity. A psychiatrist testified that he was in a psychotic state when he committed the murder, and that the lack of emotion he showed reflected his inability to appreciate the gravity of his actions. In November of 2014, the judge ruled in favor of the insanity defense and hospitalized him indefinitely. Number 5. Benjamin Nanyerego. In August of 2023, 21-year-old Nigerian college student Augusta Osidion was found murdered inside the residence of her influencer boyfriend, 26-year-old Benjamin Nanyerego. The young woman's mother discovered her body after going to Nanyerego's home in search of her daughter, whom she had not heard from in several days. Osidion's remains bore signs of violence, and Nanyerego was nowhere to be found, indicating that he had murdered his girlfriend and gone on the run. Nanyerego, known to his followers as Killer Boy, confessed to killing Osidion during an argument in a social media post. He also apologized to Osidion's mother over text message, but failed to surrender to law enforcement as promised. The accused murderer was later captured at a nightclub in Freetown, Sierra Leone, where he was living under an alias. In October of 2023, authorities began the extradition process to bring Nanyerego back to Nigeria to face justice. The case appears to be ongoing. Number 4. Lorena Bobbit. Lorena Gallo came to the United States from Ecuador with dreams of finding success in love. She thought she had achieved one of these goals when she married a U.S. Marine named John Bobbit in Manassas, Virginia in 1989, but life with her, Prince Charming, proved to be a nightmare as the couple's newly wedded bliss quickly gave way to constant arguing over money and other relationship problems. Lorena would later accuse John of abuse and intimate assault. She also claimed that John openly cheated on her and threw it in her face while failing to hold down steady work, leaving her with the burden of being the primary breadwinner of their household. As a manicurist who earned modest wages, she struggled to keep up with the bills and eventually began stealing money from her employer in order to make ends meet. Thankfully, her boss forgave her when she got caught and even allowed her to keep her job. Lorena's mental health suffered majorly due to the volatile nature of her marriage. She reached her breaking point one night in June of 1993 when John came home drunk and allegedly forced himself on her. While retrieving a glass of water in her kitchen afterward, Lorena was overcome by an impulsive rage. She grabbed a large kitchen knife, returned to the bedroom and cut John's manhood off. Lorena left the couple's home in her car with the severed appendage in her hand. She continued to hold it until she got tired of driving single-handedly and threw it out the window into a field. She drove to the home of her boss, Jana Bisuti, who called the police. In the meantime, John was rushed to the hospital. Officers retrieved the discarded body part after Lorena told them where it was and placed it on ice inside a 7-Eleven hot dog box. They dropped it off at the emergency room where a surgeon managed to reattach it. John accused Lorena of chopping his member off for revenge after he told her that he was planning to divorce her and was charged with marital assault, while Lorena claimed she had snapped after enduring years of abuse. After deliberating for 7 hours, a jury found her not guilty of malicious wounding by reason of insanity, ruling that she had experienced an irresistible impulse to hurt John. She was released from custody after undergoing a 45-day evaluation. John was acquitted, despite giving multiple different versions of the events leading up to the knife incident, and the Bobbits divorced in 1995. In the years since, Lorena has mostly kept a low profile while occasionally granting media interviews. She moved on, romantically, and has a daughter with her long-term partner. John went on to star in several adult films while continuing to bounce between various other jobs, proving to the world that his nether region had made a full recovery. And while he probably never expected to make news headlines again for having a body part amputated, media outlets reported in 2024 that he had lost his toes due to a condition called toxic peripheral polyneuropathy, which he believes he acquired from contaminated water at the infamously polluted Camp Lejeune military base. Number 3. Fidel Lopez. 26-year-old Fidel Lopez instantly snapped when his girlfriend, 31-year-old Maria Nemeth, said her ex-husband's name twice during intercourse at his apartment in Sunrise, Florida, in September of 2015. He brutally attacked Nemeth and then dialed 911 after realizing he had gone too far, telling the operator that his dying girlfriend was struggling to breathe. Officers arrived to find Nemeth disemboweled in a pool of blood on the bathroom floor. A closet door had been ripped off its hinges and the apartment's sliding glass door was shattered, serving as indicators of the violence that Nemeth had faced during her final moments. Lopez told police that he and Nemeth were extremely intoxicated when they began to fool around. They were going at it in the closet when she accidentally uttered her ex's name, prompting Nemeth to fly into a rampage. He began punching holes in the wall and destroyed things throughout the apartment, later admitting that he became a monster and directed his rage at Nemeth. When he realized Nemeth wasn't breathing, Lopez tried splashing water on her face to wake her up, but it was too late to save her, and he ultimately took responsibility for his actions by pleading guilty to first-degree murder. In exchange for his admission, the court took the death penalty off the table and sentenced him to life without parole. Today's topic was requested by Joan Tarpley, Hashish, and Candice Vedito. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. John Hinckley Jr. On a day that would go down in US history, a lone gunman opened fire on President Ronald Reagan's Secret Service detail as he exited a Hilton hotel in Washington, D.C. in late March of 1981. Reagan was rushed to the hospital and survived a gunshot to the chest which narrowly missed his heart. Police officer Thomas Delahanty, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, and White House press secretary James Brady were also wounded in the shooting. The assassination attempt was part of 27-year-old John Hinckley Jr.'s plan to impress actress Jodie Foster, who he had been stalking since the mid-1970s. When his love letters, romantic poems, and other attempts to correspond with Foster went unreciprocated, he decided that he would have to do something extreme in order to get her attention. Hinckley spent months brainstorming, researching, and meticulously planning the crime, but his defense attorneys claimed that he was legally insane when he committed the shooting due to untreated schizophrenia and his fixation with Foster, which rendered him incapable of discerning between right and wrong. Federal prosecutors emphasized the amount of preparation that Hinckley underwent, claiming that his actions were premeditated and deliberate and that he therefore wasn't insane. But the jury ruled in favor of the defense, finding Hinckley not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was remanded to the custody of a mental hospital where he spent the next 41 years until his release in 2022. As his mental health improved over the years, Hinckley gradually gained expanded freedoms and privileges, including extended leaves from the facility while visiting family, before officially being released He was living full-time at his mother's house while being kept under close supervision to ensure that he wasn't at risk of reoffending. He is now free without any restrictions and is trying to pursue a music career, but several of his scheduled concerts have been cancelled due to threats of violence. Hinckley also sells paintings on eBay and appears to be living an ordinary life while staying largely out of the spotlight. Human insanity knows no bounds, often leading to horrifying outcomes, but what happens when you falsely accuse someone for no reason? Stay tuned for our previous upload of When False Accusations Go Wrong, coming up right after number 1. Number 1. Ali Abul Lain. Once known to his TikTok followers as Jin Kid, former influencer Ali Nazir Abul Lain was popular for his comedy skits and Al Pacino impersonations, which earned him a following of more than 1 million fans. He and his wife Anna appear to be living the American dream as a successful young couple who lived in a luxury San Diego high-rise and the doting parents of a young daughter. But things were not as idyllic as they seemed. Ali had a jealous streak and narcissistic tendencies, causing Anna to emotionally check out of the marriage. He became even more controlling and abusive when Anna began to gain her own social media following, and he started live streaming their arguments on TikTok in an attempt to make her look bad. The police became frequent visitors at the home, where they responded to 9 calls over a 3-month period in 2021. Anna separated from Ali in October of 2021, staying in their apartment while Ali moved out and filed a police report, accusing her estranged husband of domestic violence. Just 3 days later, Ali entered the residence and shot Anna in the head at point-blank range before turning the gun on her friend Rayburn Cardenas Barron. He had installed a listening device on their daughter's iPad and flew into a rage after overhearing a male voice. Just hours after the double homicide, Ali was arrested on suspicion of murder. He pleaded not guilty, despite confessing during a police interview, and testified during his trial that he snapped when he entered the apartment and saw Anna snuggling with Cardenas. His narrative failed to garner any sympathy from the jury, and in May of 2024, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The convicted double killer is due to be sentenced in September. On March the 13th of 2018, officers Kyle Erickson and Elmer Pastran of the NYPD's 120th Precinct initiated a traffic stop on an SUV with a broken taillight. Among the vehicle's occupants was 30-year-old Jason Serrano, a Staten Island resident who at the time was recovering from surgery relating to a stab wound. The traffic stop culminated in Serrano's arrest, as officers Erickson and Pastran allegedly found marijuana inside the SUV. Serrano consequently faced charges of drug possession, obstructing governmental administration, and resisting arrest. He later pleaded guilty to the latter charge in order to avoid jail time. However, in November of 2021, Staten Island Criminal Court Judge Tomiko Amaka vacated the man's guilty plea following the emergence of damning body cam footage from the traffic stop 3.5 years earlier. A probe by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York led to the discovery of the video, which captured Erickson telling his partner, "We gotta find something," shortly before searching the vehicle. Erickson was subsequently shown placing a chunk of weed in the SUV's cup holder, which they used as justification for Serrano's ensuing arrest. The incident marked the second time in a matter of weeks that Erickson and Pastran had allegedly planted drugs in an innocent person's vehicle during a traffic stop. LaSalle Cuyete spent 2 weeks behind bars after getting arrested by the corrupt cops, but was likewise exonerated after body cam footage of the traffic stop came to light. Erickson left the force in 2021 in the midst of a civilian complaint review board case against him for an alleged retaliatory arrest. Meanwhile, Pastran was still listed as a community policing officer in Staten Island's 120th Precinct on the NYPD's website as of the latest updates. Number 6. Jasmine Burlingame. At about 7:30 a.m. on Valentine's Day 2015, a Denver police officer went to St. Anthony's Hospital to investigate a report of an assault. A young woman by the name of Jasmine Burlingame told the officer that she'd been abused the night before. According to Burlingame's account, she'd accompanied a male co-worker to his home, where upon arrival they encountered his roommate, playing video games. They subsequently went into the co-worker's bedroom to talk, but the roommate allegedly barged in and knocked the man unconscious. He then shifted his attention towards Burlingame, whom he was accused of pinning to the bed and viciously assaulting. Following the alleged altercation, Burlingame fled from the house and managed to get in contact with her cousin, who then drove her to the hospital. Law enforcement immediately detected inconsistencies with the young woman's testimony. The co-worker had no recollection of the events Burlingame described and didn't present with any injuries indicative of having been knocked unconscious. The roommate likewise denied the accusations against him and willingly provided a DNA sample to clear his name. Furthermore, physical evidence recovered from the crime scene reportedly contradicted the version of events provided by Burlingame during subsequent interviews with the police. The young woman stuck to her original story. However, when it was determined that she'd made the whole thing up, Burlingame was charged with attempting to influence a public official and false reporting to authorities. She was released on a $5,000 personal recognizance bond. Number 5. Reynaldo Guevara. Former Chicago detective Reynaldo Guevara worked on the city's northwest side in the 1970s and 80s, during which he helped secure dozens of murder convictions. By the year 2023, Guevara was in his 70s and living in Texas, having retired from the force. He was also facing a litany of federal and civil lawsuits in connection with his law enforcement career. Per court records, Guevara was accused of framing multiple people for murders they didn't commit, in part by forcing confessions, intimidating witnesses, and manipulating lineups. In the years following the height of his police activity, more than 30 murder convictions that happened under his watch have been thrown out. In March of 2023, 11 exonerated convicts banded together to file a new lawsuit against Guevara for allegedly framing them. One of the litigants involved was Johnny Flores, who had his murder conviction vacated the previous year. When asked what the goal for the lawsuit was, Flores stated that this never happens again, that the system is corrected to where it is more transparent and no other citizen has to go through this. As of the most recent updates on the matter, Guevara hadn't been charged with any crime, having consistently pleaded the Fifth Amendment whenever questioned about the allegations. Number 4. The framing of Yasmin Kosar. On April 1st of 2022, the charred remains of 65-year-old Mohammed Farouk were found inside a car at a garbage dump in Rawalpindi in the Punjab region of Pakistan. In the aftermath, the man's wife, Yorkshire woman Yasmin Kosar, was detained by Pakistani law enforcement on suspicion of having her husband killed by a 23-year-old man who worked for his family. 62-year-old Kosar, a resident of Leeds, publicly professed her innocence following her early morning arrest on April 4th, claiming she'd been framed. Her application for bail was initially refused by the Sessions Court in Rawalpindi. However, a judge ultimately granted her bail after the matter was taken to the High Court in Lahore. While explaining his decision, the Honorable Mr. Justice Muhammad Tariq Nadeem stated, "I have observed that no direct evidence is available against the petitioner which can connect her with the commission of crime." He went on to detail how Kosar had been arrested on the basis of a statement provided by the victim's son, Mujahid. It's been theorized that the false accusations levied against Kosar were part of a ploy by her husband's family to prevent her from receiving his inheritance. Number 3. Asme. In 2018, a man from Sydney, Australia, called for the deportation of his wife after she falsely accused him of assault. The man, identified only as Faisal, reportedly encountered his eventual spouse, a Moroccan national named Asme, on the Muslim dating site Muslima.com. Faisal later estimated that he spent upwards of $200,000 on his new bride, lavishing her with Gucci tracksuits, leather jackets, jewelry, shoes, holidays, fine dining, and even sent money back to her family in Morocco. After just 8 months of marriage, Faisal began to suspect that his wife didn't actually love him, but had taken advantage of his desire for a life partner to get into the country legally. They argued constantly, and ultimately, Faisal grew tired of the situation. He reached out to a lawyer and a visa expert in search of advice. However, Asme stumbled upon their email correspondence and subsequently took retaliatory action. As reported by the Australian news program A Current Affair, Asme trashed her husband's apartment while he was at work after discovering his doubts about her. When he arrived home that night, she stormed out. After hours had passed and Asme still hadn't returned home, Faisal went to the police station to report her missing but was instead arrested on suspicion of domestic violence. He was held in custody overnight while police officers accompanied Asme to the apartment to collect her things. Faisal later claimed that law enforcement unknowingly helped his wife steal some of his belongings, including designer sunglasses, expensive watches, and a laptop. Facing up to 7 years in jail for allegedly assaulting Asme, Faisal spent $20,000 on a lawyer to help prove his innocence. He finally did just that after examining hours upon hours of CCTV footage. After storming out of the apartment that fateful night, Asme had entered the elevator where she delivered a pair of blows to her own face in order to legitimize her false accusations against her husband. Once the truth surfaced, Asme fled Sydney. Faisal called upon the Australian government to track her down and deport her back to Morocco. Number 2. Ruben Venzor. Texas man Ruben Venzor filed a complaint with the Internal Affairs Division of the El Paso Police Department on July the 5th of 2022. 29-year-old Venzor claimed that during a traffic stop that occurred in February, he'd been placed in handcuffs and slammed against the hood of a police vehicle by officers. Internal investigators were told that an El Paso officer had grabbed the man by the shoulder and elbow and forcefully pushed his head into the hood. However, a review of the video footage of the traffic stop made it clear that Venzor's allegations against the officers involved were completely unfounded. The clip showed the man bend forward and strike his own forehead against the police car without any added force. He ultimately admitted to falsifying the accusations and was arrested on charges of making a false report to a peace officer. Number 1. Katherine Elizabeth Bennett. 21-year-old Katherine Elizabeth Bennett from Fort Collins, Colorado, claimed to have been lured to a Safeway parking lot in Windsor by a male acquaintance whom she accused of kidnapping and assaulting her on November the 24th of 2013. The accused, identified as 25-year-old Daniel Toth, insisted that their encounter had been consensual. However, Bennett was steadfast in her claims that Toth accosted her at knife point, drugged her, and took her back to his nearby home to abuse her. After the young woman brought her allegations to the police, Toth, a Windsor National Guardsman, was arrested on serious felony charges. He consequently lost his job at Otterbox and was prohibited from deploying to Cuba with his Army National Guard team. As the investigation progressed, however, law enforcement officials began to suspect Bennett of being untruthful in her original testimony. She made several changes to her story and made claims that were found to be verifiably false. She also reportedly deleted text messages that contradicted her initial police reports. On December the 10th, a warrant was issued for Bennett's arrest on suspicion of fabricating an elaborate kidnapping hoax against Toth. The case against the latter was dropped, but he experienced lasting effects from the ordeal both personally and professionally. Toth reportedly struggled to find work and had multiple apartment applications rejected. He also started enduring anxiety attacks as a consequence of his experience. In August of 2014, a jury found Bennett guilty of lying to police and 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence. The young woman's parents pleaded with the judge for leniency, expressing a desire for their daughter to continue seeing a psychiatrist for treatment of several mental health conditions including depression, OCD, and PTSD. They highlighted Bennett's lack of criminal history as well as her mental struggles as reason enough for the judge to impose a light punishment. In October of 2014, a Weld County judge sentenced her to 32 days in jail, 180 days of electronic home monitoring, and 5 years of supervised probation. Thanks for watching. What is the dumbest or craziest thing you have ever done while under the influence of alcohol? Let us know in the comments section below.